Ladies and gentlemen, we live in an age where the currency of conversation is often confusion, where people wear masks not to protect others, but to hide themselves. But in such an age, there rises a figure of grace, of virtue, of luminous inner strength, a hive, you woman. And what makes her hive, you? It is not wealth, nor influence, nor applause from the world. No, it is her alignment with truth, her fidelity to dignity, and her quiet strength in the face of the storm. And so, when the winds of toxicity blow, when manipulation, deceit, and emotional chaos knock at her door, how does such a woman respond? She does not descend, she ascends. She responds, not reacts. The hive, you woman, understands that not every word thrown at her deserves a reply, and not every insult requires a defense. She has learned through prayer, through suffering, and through reflection that reactions are often the fruit of wounded ego, but responses are born of a disciplined spirit. A reaction is like striking a match in a dry forest. It ignites quickly and consumes everything in its path. But a response is like lighting a lantern. In the dark it illuminates, it clarifies, and it serves a purpose. When someone toxic provokes her, whether through passive aggression, manipulation, or overt hostility, she does not give them the satisfaction of her emotional chaos. She does not tremble at their rage or bend to their tactics. She pauses, she breathes. She remembers that even our Lord, when unjustly accused, did not lash out. He stood in silence before the Pharisees and Pilate, not because he had no defense, but because his dignity needed no defense. The hive, you woman, has trained herself to delay the impulse. She no longer allows others to pull her strings like a puppet. If she must speak, she speaks with clarity, not with venom. If she must act, she does so with calm, not with chaos. And sometimes, the greatest strength she shows is in walking away without saying a word. She does not entertain the circus because she is not a performer. It takes great inner work to reach this place. It takes healing. It takes the humility to confront one's own wounds and the grace to rise above them. But once she masters the art of response, she becomes untouchable in the best sense. Her peace cannot be stolen, and her value cannot be diminished by the opinions or behavior of others. In every encounter with a toxic person, she asks herself, will this cost me my peace? And if the answer is yes, she chooses silence. She chooses stillness, because she knows that reacting is easy, but responding is divine. She sets boundaries, not walls. A hive, you woman, understands that love without wisdom can become self-destruction. She has learned, often through painful experience, that access to her life is not a right. It is a privilege. Toxic people do not knock gently at the doors of the soul. They barge in, rearrange the furniture, and leave behind confusion. So she does not build walls to shut the world out, but she builds boundaries to let only the right people in. Boundaries are not cold or cruel. They are not rejection, but protection. They are not punishment, but discernment. The hive, you woman, is not interested in punishing people for being who they are. She is simply no longer willing to pay the emotional price for allowing them too close. She does not hate the toxic person. She just refuses to let them set fire to her peace again. She knows the difference between openness and vulnerability. Being open is a virtue. Being vulnerable without wisdom is a wound waiting to happen. So she guards her heart, not in fear, but in reverence. Just as a cathedral does not leave its sacred altar open to the careless crowd, neither does she leave her spirit exposed to those who do not come in truth. When she says no, she means it, not with anger, but with clarity. She no longer explains, justifies, or over-apologizes for protecting her energy. She understands that a person who is offended by her boundaries was benefiting from her lack of them. She is not rigid, she is rooted. She is not distant, she is discerning. If someone proves they can respect her space, her time, her values, then she welcomes them. But if they cross her limits, she does not argue. She simply closes the gate, not with bitterness, but with peace. And what's more, she does not feel guilty for it, because she knows, even Christ withdrew. Even Christ left the crowds to pray. Even Christ said, "Do not throw your pearls before swine." She follows this wisdom not from pride, but from purpose. In setting boundaries, she honors not only herself, but also the God who created her. She says to the world, "I am not yours to use, but God's to guard." And that quiet strength, that unwavering stance, becomes her shield in a world that tries to test her worth at every turn. She chooses compassion over contempt. This does not mean she excuses abuse, nor does she confuse kindness with passivity. Rather, it means that even when confronted with the cruelty of toxic behavior, lies, manipulation, emotional volatility, she refuses to let her heart be hardened by it. The high, you woman has learned that contempt is a poison that corrodes the soul from within. It gives the toxic person a second victory. Not only did they hurt her once, but now they continue to live in her mind, shaping her with bitterness. She will not allow that. Instead, she chooses the higher path, compassion. Not a sentimental, soft compassion that tolerates mistreatment, but a grounded, spiritual compassion that sees people for what they are. Often broken, often lost, often lashing out from places of deep, hidden pain. This understanding does not bind her to them. It frees her from the need to hate them, and that freedom is power. She understands that toxic people often operate from wounds they refuse to heal, masks they refuse to remove, and patterns they repeat because they've never known anything better. But her heart, shaped by prayer and suffering, has come to understand something profound. You can love someone from a distance. You can pray for their healing even while protecting yourself from their harm. There is no virtue in remaining close to someone who repeatedly injures your peace. Compassion does not mean access. Forgiveness does not mean reconnection. The high, you woman forgives for her own liberation, not so the other may feel comfortable, but so her own spirit may breathe again. And she does this without turning toxic herself. She does not gossip, retaliate, or seek revenge. She simply lets go. She releases the anger not because they deserve it, but because she deserves peace. She entrusts them to God, the only one who can truly change a heart, and moves on. She knows the power of letting go with grace. She walks away, not with spite in her voice, but with mercy in her heart. And in doing so, she shows a strength that few can imitate. The strength to keep her heart soft in a world that tried to make it hard. The strength to keep her soul clean in battles that could have made it bitter. The strength to remain kind, not because life was easy, but because she chose not to be conquered by the cruelty of others. That is her quiet revolution. That is her unmatched dignity. She guards her energy like a sacred flame, not out of fear, but out of reverence. A high, you woman has come to understand that her time, her focus, and her emotional presence are not infinite resources to be spent recklessly. They are sacred gifts, gifts entrusted to her by God, meant to be invested in purpose, in healing, in creativity, and in love that reflects the divine. And just like a candle burning in a cathedral, her inner light must be shielded from the careless winds of drama, manipulation, and emotional exploitation. Toxic people do not knock politely. They crash into a life with their chaos disguised as urgency, their selfishness dressed as need, and their instability masquerading as passion. But she has learned the difference between those who genuinely need help and those who simply drain her because they refuse to grow. She no longer entertains emotional vampires who feed on her empathy. Her compassion is deep, but it is no longer directionless. She used to think it was loving to always be available, to always say yes, to give second chances endlessly, but she has since realized that not everyone who reaches for her deserves to be held, and not every crisis deserves her response. Some fires are meant to burn themselves out without her rushing in to rescue. Her energy is her responsibility. She wakes up each day knowing she must choose how she spends it. She chooses carefully. She gives to what aligns with her values. She pours herself into relationships that nourish her, work that fulfills her, and spaces where her peace is multiplied, not taxed. And when she senses a presence that is chaotic, controlling, or constantly negative, she does not argue or justify. She simply withdraws, quietly, calmly, with the same grace a priest closes the tabernacle, because something sacred must be protected. She has stopped feeling guilty for being unavailable to dysfunction. She no longer lets guilt be the leash others tug when they want control. She has come to see that burnout is not a badge of honor. It is a sign that too many unworthy things have been allowed to feed from her flame. So now she shields it. She no longer overshares with those who only listen to twist her words. She no longer gives endless explanations to those who already made up their mind. And she no longer feels obligated to keep people warm who would leave her cold. She honors her energy as holy ground because she knows it is the life, breath of her soul's purpose. And so she protects it, not with hardness, but with holiness. Not with arrogance, but with assurance. Not because she thinks she is better than others, but because she finally knows she was never meant to live burned out and dim. She was meant to shine, clearly, gently, and powerfully, for the glory of God and the good of her destiny. She walks away without guilt. This is perhaps one of the most difficult lessons you woman must learn in a world that often equates endurance with virtue and sacrifice with love. Society teaches us to stay, to suffer in silence, to bear the unbearable for the sake of loyalty or obligation. But she understands that there is a sacred difference between sacrifice and self-destruction. Walking away is not an act of cowardice or weakness. It is an act of courage and wisdom. It is the recognition that some battles are not hers to fight, some wounds are not hers to heal, and some storms are meant to be left behind so she can step into the sunlight of peace. She walks away not because she has stopped caring, but because she cares enough about herself to preserve the integrity of her soul. Toxic people will try to guilt her into staying, telling her she is abandoning, failing, or being selfish. But she no longer accepts these lies as truth. She knows that staying in a toxic environment only dims her light, steals her joy, and distorts her worth. Her departure is not an escape. It is a declaration. A declaration that she will no longer allow her spirit to be a battleground for anger, manipulation, or disrespect. She refuses to carry the weight of another's toxicity as if it were her own cross. Instead, she sets it down and walks forward, freed by the grace of self-respect and the courage of self-love. She understands that sometimes love means letting go, not holding on. That sometimes peace means walking away, not fighting. And that sometimes faith means trusting God to handle what she cannot, instead of draining her strength trying to fix what is broken beyond repair. When she leaves, she does so with dignity, not bitterness. She does not slam the door behind her, but closes it gently, with prayer on her lips and hope in her heart. She does not look back in anger, but glances back with compassion, because she knows that everyone's journey is their own, and not all souls are ready for healing at the same time. She walks away without guilt because she has finally understood a divine truth. Her value is not defined by the battles she endures, but by the peace she chooses. And in choosing peace, she does not lose herself, she finds herself. You see, the high value woman is not arrogant. She is anchored, not heartless, but healed, not unkind, but unmoved by manipulation. And in every toxic encounter, she remembers, I am not who they say I am. I am who God says I am. So, to every woman hearing this, you do not owe your peace to chaos. You do not owe your light to darkness. You owe your soul to God. Walk on and walk high.